Lady Gaga was mid-sentence during a live interview when her words just stopped. Her eyes locked onto someone in the audience. Her hands slowly rose to point, and the entire studio fell into a silence, so thick you could hear the cameras worrying. Jimmy Fallon's smile froze. The band stopped playing. 300 people held their breath. And in that moment, nobody, not the producers, not the crew, not the millions watching at home, had any idea what was about to happen next. But to understand this moment, we need to go back 3 hours earlier to a regular Tuesday night taping of The Tonight Show, when everything seemed perfectly normal. It was 6:47 p.m. at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Studio 6B buzzed with the familiar pre-show energy. Audience members filed in, shuffling past ushers with their phones already out, hoping to catch a glimpse of tonight's guest. The marquee outside had announced it weeks ago, Lady Gaga, one of the biggest names in music, returning to Fallon's couch to promote her latest album. The tickets had sold out in 4 minutes. Jimmy Fallon was in his dressing room going through his usual routine. Tie adjusted, hair checked. Blue cards shuffled with tonight's talking points. His team had prepared the segment perfectly. Start with her new single transition into a story about her recent charity work. Close with a game. Clean, professional, entertaining. Exactly what The Tonight Show had been doing for decades. But nobody backstage knew that in exactly 2 hours and 19 minutes, Jimmy Fallon would throw away those blue cards, walk off his mark, and do something he never done in 15 years of hosting. In the green room, Lady Gaga sat quietly, her glam team making final touches to her hair. She wore a custom pale pink gown that shimmered under the lights, her platinum hair styled in soft waves. She seemed calm, focused, running through vocal warm-ups. Her manager reviewed the schedule one more time. Everything was on track. Meanwhile, in the audience, an elderly man took his seat in the third row. His name was Vincent, though nobody in the studio knew that yet. He was 76 years old, wearing a simple gray cardigan over a white button-down shirt. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed his pants. His daughter sat beside him, squeezing his hand. She'd surprised him with these tickets 3 months ago, back when he could still remember things clearly. Vincent had early-stage Alzheimer's. Some days were good. Some days he forgot where he was. But tonight his daughter told him tonight they were going to see Lady Gaga. And for reasons Vincent couldn't quite explain, that name meant something deep to him, something important, something from before the fog set in. The show began right on schedule. Fallon's opening monologue landed perfectly. The audience laughed in all the right places. The Roots played their transitions flawlessly. Everything was running like clockwork. This was a well-oiled machine, a broadcast that reached millions of homes every single night. Then came the announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Gaga." The studio erupted. Gaga walked out, waving to the crowd, that million-dollar smile beaming under the stage lights. She hugged Jimmy, sat down in the guest chair, and the interview began. They talked about her album. They laughed about a story from her last visit. The energy was electric, effortless, exactly what late-night television is supposed to be. Fallon leaned forward with his next question, something about her creative process, and Gaga started answering. Her voice was animated, confident, gesturing with her hands as she described writing music at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then mid-sentence, she stopped. Not a pause, a full stop. Her eyes had drifted past Jimmy, scanning the audience as she spoke, the way performers do to connect with the crowd. But then, her gaze locked, fixed on someone in the third row. The room felt it immediately. Something had shifted. The temperature dropped. Time slowed. Jimmy noticed first. He tilted his head, confused. "Gaga," he said softly, his smile still there, but uncertain now. She didn't respond. Her hand slowly rose, pointing toward the audience. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Tears began forming in her eyes, visible even from the back row. The cameras didn't know where to go. One stayed on Gaga's face. Another quickly panned to the audience, searching for what she was looking at. The director in the control room frantically whispered into headsets. Nobody had rehearsed this. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Jimmy stood up from his desk. The blue cards fell from his hand, scattering across the floor. He walked around the desk slowly, approaching Gaga, his face no longer showing confusion, but deep concern. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, though his microphone picked it up. The question echoed through the studio. Gaga's voice finally came, shaky and raw. "That man," she whispered, pointing, "in the gray cardigan third row." Every head in the audience turned. The camera zoomed in, and there he was. Vincent Rossi, tears streaming down his weathered face, his hand covering his mouth, his entire body trembling. Jimmy looked at Vincent, then back at Gaga. The audience sat frozen, confused, captivated, unable to look away. This wasn't part of the show. This was real. Gaga stood up from her chair. Her heels clicked against the stage floor as she walked to the edge, her eyes never leaving Vincent. Security instinctively moved forward, but Jimmy raised his hand, stopping them. He understood somehow that whatever was happening here was bigger than protocol. "What's your name?" Gaga called out to Vincent, her voice breaking. Vincent's daughter leaned close to him, whispering encouragement. He nodded, wiping his eyes with shaking hands, and managed to speak. "Vincent," he said, his voice. "Vincent Rossi." The name hung in the air for a moment, and then Gaga's face crumpled. She brought both hands to her chest, visibly struggling to hold herself together. The audience remained silent, 300 people witnessing something they didn't understand, but could feel in their bones was profound. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He walked to the edge of the stage and extended his hand to Vincent. "Would you come up here, sir?" His voice was gentle, respectful, stripped of all showmanship. This wasn't Jimmy Fallon, the host, anymore. This was a human being recognizing a moment that transcended entertainment. Vincent's daughter helped him stand. The audience parted as he made his way to the aisle, moving slowly, deliberately, like a man walking towards something he'd waited his entire life to reach. Crew members rushed to help him up the steps to the stage, and Jimmy guided him carefully to center stage, right next to Lady Gaga. They stood face to face. Gaga, this icon of modern music in her shimmering gown, and Vincent, an elderly man in a cardigan who looked like someone's grandfather. The contrast was striking. The silence was deafening. Gaga reached out and took both of Vincent's hands in hers. Tears ran freely down her face now, mascara beginning to smudge. She didn't care. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling but clear enough for the microphones to catch. "And I need everyone here to hear it." Jimmy stepped back, giving them space but staying close. The cameras captured everything. The control room had stopped trying to direct. They just let it roll. Gaga took a shaky breath. 32 years ago, she began. "When I was 4 years old, my mother was in a car accident in New York City. It was raining. She lost control. The car flipped twice on the FDR drive. The audience gasped softly. Vincent's eyes widened with recognition. Tears flowing harder now. A man stopped. Gaga continued. "He pulled over in the rain, ran to the car, and pulled my mother out before it caught fire. He stayed with her until the ambulance came. He held her hand. He told her she was going to be okay. He saved her life." Gaga's voice broke completely, and she had to pause, squeezing Vincent's hands tighter. Jimmy instinctively stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support that felt entirely natural in this suspended moment. "My mother tried to find him afterward," Gaga said, fighting through tears. She only remembered his first name, Vincent. She never forgot him. She told me that story my entire childhood. She said an angel saved her that day. And because he saved her, Gaga's voice dissolved into sobs. "Because he saved her, I'm here. I exist because of you." The studio erupted into gasps, into tears, into a collective emotional release that swept through the room like a wave. Vincent was openly weeping now, nodding, his voice too choked to speak. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Vincent reached into his cardigan pocket with trembling hands and pulled out something small, a photograph creased and faded, edges worn from years of being carried. He held it up with shaking fingers. It was a Polaroid of a young woman sitting in a hospital bed, smiling despite the bandages, giving a thumbs up to the camera. On the back, barely visible to the cameras, but clear enough for Gaga to see, was handwritten. "Thank you, Vincent. You are my angel. Cynthia, 1993. Gaga took the photo, staring at it, her whole body shaking. "You kept this," she whispered. "All these years." Vincent finally found his voice weak, but steady. "I visited her," he said. "In the hospital once, she was okay. She said she had a little girl at home. I'm glad." His voice broke. "I'm so glad you're here." Gaga collapsed into him, hugging him tightly. This stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. This man who had given her the gift of existence without ever knowing her name. Vincent wrapped his arms around her, crying into her shoulder. Decades of wondering if that woman was okay finally answered in the most impossible way. Jimmy Fallon to 3 feet away, his own eyes red, his hand over his mouth. The cameras caught him wiping tears with the back of his hand. The Roots in the background had put down their instruments, watching in stunned silence. The audience was a sea of tears and disbelief. For nearly 3 minutes, the show just stopped. No jokes, no transitions, no segments, just this moment unfolding live on national television, raw and unscripted and impossibly real. When Gaga finally pulled back, she kept hold of Vincent's hands. She looked at Jimmy, then at the audience, then back at Vincent. "I want everyone to know," she said, her voice steadier now, filled with purpose. "This man is the reason I'm standing here. Everything I've done, every song I've written, every stage I've performed on, it exists because he didn't drive past my mother that night." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Not the kind of applause you give a celebrity. The kind you give when you've witnessed something sacred. Vincent covered his face, overwhelmed, his daughter in the audience openly sobbing with pride and disbelief. Jimmy walked over and put his arm around Vincent's shoulders. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are an extraordinary human being, and I think I speak for everyone here when I say thank you. Thank you for being exactly who you are." The applause grew louder. The Roots began playing softly, a gentle melody that swelled with the emotion in the room. Gaga hugged Vincent again, whispering something in his ear that the microphones didn't catch. Whatever she said made him smile through his tears and nod. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Vincent's daughter was brought up to the stage and the reunion expanded. Gaga hugged her too, thanking her for bringing her father tonight, for this impossible convergence of past and present. They stood together, this unlikely group connected by a moment 3 decades old that had just been resurrected live on national television. Eventually, reluctantly, the show had to continue. Producers were signaling. Schedules had to be kept, but Jimmy didn't rush it. He made sure Vincent and his daughter were comfortable, seated in special chairs brought out just for them, right next to his desk for the rest of the show. They became part of the broadcast, honored guests in a night that had become something far bigger than anyone planned. When the show ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Jimmy did something he'd never done before. He took off his tie, the one he'd been wearing all night, and handed it to Vincent. "Keep this," Jimmy said quietly, "so you remember that the world saw what you did and that it mattered." Vincent held the tie like it was made of gold, nodding through fresh tears. Backstage, Gaga and Vincent talked for another hour. Crew members hovered, not wanting to interrupt, but unable to leave. Stories were shared, phone numbers exchanged, promises made to stay in touch. Gaga told Vincent about her mother, how she'd be calling her the second she got home, how this was a miracle she never thought possible. The footage went viral within hours. By morning, the clip had 50 million views. News outlets around the world picked up the story. People shared it with captions like, "Faith in humanity restored." And this is why live TV exists. It became one of the most watched Tonight Show moments in history. But for Jimmy Fallon, the impact was deeper and more personal. In interviews weeks later, he spoke about that night with a reverence he usually reserved for nothing. "I've done this job for 15 years, he said. "I've interviewed presidents, icons, legends. But that night reminded me what this show is really for. It's not just entertainment. It's connection. It's humanity. And sometimes, if we're really lucky, it's magic." The blue-tied Jimmy gave to Vincent now sits framed in Vincent's home next to the old Polaroid of Gaga's mother. Vincent passed away 8 months later, his Alzheimer's progressing quickly. But his daughter said that in his final weeks, even when he couldn't remember his own address, he still remembered that night. He'd point to the tie and say, "Lady Gaga, I saved her mother." And Jimmy Fallon learned something that night that changed how he hosted forever. Sometimes the most important moment isn't the one you planned. It's the one you allow to happen when you're brave enough to stop the show.